Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here at Sydney Airport this morning. I'm joined by the Tourism Minister, Investment and Jobs Minister, Stuart Ayres, the Deputy Chairman of Rex, John Sharp, and Jeremy McAnulty, who will provide a public health update here for our state. But today is a great day for the people of New South Wales, and I want to thank Rex Airlines for committing to Sydney as their home well into the future. Last year, we announced our Jobs Plus program to drive incentives for businesses to relocate into New South Wales or expand their operations. And today, we have a very important announcement that Rex will be expanding its footprint, not just here in Sydney, but across the state. So today, this investment from Rex will ensure, as part of our Jobs Plus program, as part of that partnership, a long-term commitment that will create over 2,500 jobs by mid-2024. We will see a jobs boom, jobs take off right across our state, and it is an indication of the confidence the private sector has in the New South Wales economy. This is all about jobs, 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 driving investment in our state. We know that Sydney is Australia's only truly global city, and to have this sign of confidence and investment in our state will drive the economy. It will ensure that jobs are created right across the state as we set up opportunity and prosperity for now and for decades to come.
Good morning, everyone.
This is always going to happen.
Adelaide has now reached its final stage at gate 55. If you hold a boarding pass for this service, can you please make your way to gate 55 immediately?
Minister Ayres will speak further to this, but we set up Investment New South Wales in our state to partner with the private sector to drive capital investment into our state well into the future through payroll tax incentives and a whole range of other initiatives to ensure that businesses have the confidence to invest. And that's incredibly important, because the greater the investment, the more jobs, the greater opportunity and prosperity for the people of our state moving forward. We've always had strong financial foundations in this state, strongest economy in the country, and importantly, as part of that, it's working with the private sector to drive that investment, so that will create more jobs for the people of our state. And this commitment today from Rex is a sign of confidence in the New South Wales economy. It's a sign of confidence that will drive opportunity and prosperity for the people of our state for decades to come. This investment today will also include an expansion of the call centre, Rex's call centre in Orange, also a flight simulator, as well as other expansions right here at Sydney Airport. Sydney is Australia's tourism capital, and importantly, this investment will ensure greater tourism opportunities for regional New South Wales. We know many people aren't just travelling to the regional New South Wales for tourism, but also for business, and this opportunity and creation of a new hangar, more opportunities, more investment from Rex will provide greater jobs, greater opportunity and prosperity for the people of our state. I want to thank John for making this investment, for having confidence in New South Wales to invest more, to expand more and create greater jobs and opportunities, not just for us, but for generations to come. I'm now going to pass to Minister Ayres, who will provide some further information in relation to how this will help drive jobs and economic growth in our state, but importantly as well, the programs that he is running through Investment New South Wales. And I think the drive and determination that Stuart has shown has ensured that businesses, corporations like Rex Airlines will continue to call New South Wales home. After Stuart, I'll ask John Sharp to make some further comments in relation to the importance of this investment, not just for his company, but for the people of our great state. And then Jeremy McAnulty will give a public health update, and then we'll take your questions.
Thank you, Premier. This is a fantastic announcement for people right across New South Wales, because it's a vote of confidence in the New South Wales economy, and it's a sign that things are starting to get back to normal. It's great to see people walking around the airport, planes starting to fly. That's a sense that we're back out moving again. There is a sense of optimism amongst the domestic tourism economy, with more people travelling across Australia. The sooner we get all of our borders across the country open, will be a great thing. But here today, we're seeing the expansion of one of Australia's great regional businesses, and it's fantastic to see that Rex is now stepping out to fly larger aircraft, the 737 aircraft, across those domestic routes, because more competition in our aviation sector means better prices for customers. We also want to be able to support Rex expand here in New South Wales. We're incredibly proud of what they've been able to do across the regional parts of our state, but the Jobs Plus program is allowing them to expand the amount of people that they employ here in New South Wales. This support from the government will allow for the creation of a new maintenance hangar here at Sydney Airport, which means more science, technology, engineering and manufacturing jobs. They are exactly the type of jobs that we need here in New South Wales for the strength of the rebound as we bounce back from COVID-19. We'll also see a new flight simulator facility put in here, making it easier for people who are learning how to fly and work with Rex to be able to do that from New South Wales. An expansion of the call centre facility in Orange means more jobs in regional centres. This is exactly what Jobs Plus was designed to do, to bring forward investment that was going to be delayed by COVID or in fact not even take place at all. This means more jobs today and a stronger economy into the future.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Premier Dominic Perrottet and Minister Stuart Ayres. Ladies and gentlemen, well, on behalf of Rex and all of our people who speak on the PA system,
DQ762 has now reached its final stage at gate lounge 55. If you hold a boarding pass for this flight, can you please make your immediate way to gate 55 as we are now ready to depart. Thank you.
you can trust the Qantas group to interfere with our Rex announcement. But on behalf of all the people at Rex, our staff, our board, and indeed all of our shareholders, I'd like to personally thank the New South Wales Government for this extraordinary assistance that they are providing Rex to enable us to expand our business here in New South Wales. And as Minister Ayres has just said, we're going to be building a new hangar here, which will be a major maintenance hub for the Rex network around Australia, and it'll create more jobs, engineering jobs and skilled jobs here in Sydney. As a consequence of that, we'll be building a brand new simulator centre here in Mascot, which will mean that Sydney will become a major training facility for all of our staff throughout our national network. And it also means we're going to be expanding our call centre, which has been in Orange forever. We'll be expanding that very significantly. And so we wouldn't have been able to do all of these things. We would not have been able to expand our business without the assistance of the New South Wales Government. And so by expanding our business, we will be not only going into the domestic airline market and creating more choice for passengers to travel around Australia, but we'll also be introducing and have introduced significant reductions in price for people who want to fly around Australia between our capital cities. And so the benefits that flow from the assistance that the New South Wales Government is giving us just doesn't flow through in the form of jobs. It also flows through in the form of cheaper airfares for people who fly and more choices and indeed better services. And so these are the subsequent results of this type of assistance. And so Rex, as a part of this, will be creating 1,300 new jobs here in New South Wales, and there'll be subsequently another 1,200 jobs that will flow through as a consequence of all of that investment. And so all of that would not have happened without the assistance from the New South Wales Government. And so, again, I say thank you to the Government of New South Wales. And I'd say on behalf of Rex that Rex was born and bred in New South Wales nearly 70 years ago. Max Hazelton in Cudal near Orange and Don Kendall in Wagga created what is now Rex 70 years ago. And so this is a great vote of confidence in our future, and we look forward to fulfilling all the terms of this agreement between ourselves and the New South Wales Government to create all of those jobs and to provide all of those services here in New South Wales for people who live and work in New South Wales.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Premier and Minister Ayres. And I'd like to give a COVID update for New South Wales for up to last night. Across New South Wales, in terms of vaccination, now more than 95% of people aged 16 years and over have received their first dose, and 94.1% have received 2 doses. Of people aged 12 to 15 years, 83.4% have received their first dose, and 78.6% have received 2 doses. Of children 5 to 11, 42.2% have now received their primary dose, their first dose of vaccine. And following advice from ATAGI, the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, children 16 and 17, along with adults, can now receive a booster dose 3 months after their second dose, which is great news because boostering is really important, and we need to make sure those booster shots for all people 16 and over now are given on time, because boostering is really important for preventing the transmission and serious disease that we're seeing that can occur in some people from COVID. Sadly, we're reporting the deaths of 18 people who've been diagnosed with COVID, 11 men and 7 women. Of the 18 people who died, 1 person was in their 40s, 3 in their 60s, 4 in their 70s, 6 in their 80s, 4 in their 90s. 2 people who died who were under 65, a man and a woman, both had received 2 doses of COVID vaccine, and 1 person had significant underlying health conditions. The 2 people who died had received 3 doses of COVID vaccine. 14 people had received, 2 people who died had received 3 doses of COVID vaccine, 14 people who had received 2 doses, 1 person had received 1 dose, and 1 person was not vaccinated. So we'd like to express our sincere condolences to the people who've died and sympathy to friends and family of those people. In terms of hospitalisations, there are currently 2,337 people admitted to hospital in New South Wales who've been diagnosed with COVID, including 152 in intensive care, 70 of whom require ventilation. In terms of testing numbers, there were 8,389 people who reported positive tests in the last 24 hours to 4 p.m. yesterday, including 5,300 who were positive on a rapid antigen test and 3,089 who were positive on a PCR test. Thanks very much.
Questions? Mr. Sharp, when will the hangar and the simulator centre begin construction, and when will that construction be slated to finish?
The hangar here at Sydney Airport will be a C-class hangar, which means it'll take a 737 or an A320, and it will be constructed over near the executive jet area, which you're familiar with, and construction of that is going to commence immediately, and so that...
Good morning everyone, this is an urgent call for the following transport passengers travelling through to Adelaide on GQ 762, Mr Rex Clayton, Miss Noel Alasrawi, Mr Lihan Patel, Miss Shivani Patel, Mr Nikul Kumar Patel, and Miss Nasim Tang. You are invited passengers to board this service, and ongoing procedures have now commenced. Can you please make your immediate way to get lounge 55?
Okay, thanks. Sorry about all that. As for the Flight Simulator Centre, we'll be installing a Boeing 737 flight simulator here in Mascot. That'll be done later this year. The exact date I'm not certain about because it won't be till the second half of the calendar year. And construction of the hangar will start in the first half of this calendar year, and we hope to have it completed by the end of this calendar year. The construction of the hangar and also the Flight Simulator Centre will be functioning by the end of this calendar year as well.
I think it was about this time last year, John, there was another major announcement just over at Gate 49 when we were going to. It's been a pretty turbulent year for everyone. Are you surprised that Rex is where he's at right now?
Well, I get surprised constantly with things to do with Rex. Yes, well, look, we've had an extraordinary 12 months where Rex decided to expand its operations, which are traditionally regional operations around Australia, into the domestic airline market, and we commenced our first service on the 1st of March last year with one of these aircraft you see out there, VHPAG at the moment, which will be taking off very shortly. We started with 6 Boeing 737-800s, and it's not worked exactly as you'd like it to, because COVID has made it difficult for things to operate. And when we thought we'd arrived at the end of the long dark tunnel at the end of last year, we thought that things would be improving, and indeed they did briefly, and then we had the Omicron variant, and that's really knocked airlines back to where they were 12 months ago. So it's been a really difficult period. We've had a lot of assistance, not just from the New South Wales government that we're talking about today, but we've had assistance from the Commonwealth government to keep us going through all of this, and that's been much appreciated. But you know, the interesting thing is that unlike all the other airlines in Australia, Rex is the only one that's expanding. We're employing more people, we're providing more aircraft into our fleet, and we're expanding to more destinations around Australia. And you'll see more announcements about that in the very near future. We've committed to add another 8 737s to our fleet during the course of this calendar year. The first of those will arrive in the next 2 or 3 months, and we'll announce new destinations with those extra aircraft. So Rex has always been different, and when everybody else's airline is shrinking, Rex is expanding, and that's the reason we've survived. We've always been a little different to everybody else and managed to survive when others have failed.
Do you feel, as far as the aviation sector goes here in Australia, that things are on the up?
Look, I think it's always very hard to predict, and I've watched some of my colleagues in the airline industry make predictions that we'll be at 105% of pre-COVID capacity, or 115 by this particular date. None of those predictions have come true. I don't pretend to be a Nostradamus and see what the future holds. What I do see, though, is that there's a slight lifting in bookings, and that's very encouraging, but it's still very early days to say that that's a trend. But you would have to expect, logic tells you that as we move through the Omicron variant, then we should be starting to see confidence come back into the community. And when confidence comes back, people will book their flights and start to travel, and that'll work well for not just airlines but for the tourism industry overall, and it'll start to lift our economy as a consequence.
Premier, how much of the Jobs Plus program assistance is going towards Rex, and how many companies are involved in the Jobs Plus program?
Well, I'll get Stuart to provide some further information in relation to that. But we set aside $250 million to drive jobs growth in this state and to drive capital investment into New South Wales. And that's exactly what's occurring. And that's just not companies like Rex that are expanding, that are already here and preserving their footprint here in New South Wales, but growing it, but also attracting further investment, not just from around the country, but around the world. And this was always about ensuring that we had the incentives in place to drive jobs creation here in New South Wales and to drive confidence. John just spoke about the aviation industry going forward. Confidence is key. And we've seen that over what has been a difficult 2 years. It's been a challenging time for the aviation sector, not just here in New South Wales, but globally. But if you drive confidence with a strong health response and a strong financial and economic response off the back, we know that long-term success will come to our state. And we've gone into this pandemic here in New South Wales with strong financial foundations, strong economic foundations, and that's enabled us to drive investment right across the board. And to be able, as the former Premier set out, as the former Treasurer, and Stuart was the Jobs Minister at the time, when we set up this fund, this was all about a long-term play to provide confidence for businesses like Rex to expand their footprint, to provide jobs and opportunity for not just now, but well into the future. And we have seen substantive engagement right across the board, nationally, internationally, in our fund. We want to have the most competitive business conditions anywhere in the country, if not the world, to provide that confidence for businesses to set up, establish themselves and expand and see a jobs boom off the back of it. But I'll get Stuart to talk about some of the other work the $250 million Jobs Plus Fund has been working on in terms of driving that investment into our state.
Thanks, Premier. Jobs Plus is a $250 million allocation from the New South Wales government, but also has the ability for the government to concierge investment into the state and support growing businesses with payroll tax relief. That's exactly what we've packaged up here for Rex. Every Jobs Plus program is slightly different. And it's been a fantastic program for New South Wales because we know the growth sectors of this state, whether they are based around engineering and manufacturing or aviation and tourism. We've also seen businesses like Baxter and SpeedX in the medtech space be able to access support here from the New South Wales government to grow their businesses. Some businesses have relocated into New South Wales, or in this case, a business like Rex, which probably, or as John said, would not have been able to expand at the rate that they've expanded here without this program. Jobs Plus is all about bringing investment forward, making sure jobs are created earlier, and that's exactly what we need to make sure the New South Wales economy bounces back as strong as it possibly can from the impacts of COVID-19.
So if the assistance to Rex has generated 2,500 jobs, how much has Jobs Plus, the program, generated so far?
So at the completion of Jobs Plus, we're very confident that we'll meet, if not exceed, our 25,000 jobs target. The Jobs Plus program is still open for businesses right across the world, right across the country, to make contact with the New South Wales government to talk to us about your expansion programs. We know boards are considering investment decisions right now as economies start to repair from the impacts of COVID-19. These are the decisions that are in front of business leaders. We want to see more of those jobs placed here in New South Wales. So this is a really strong message that we're open for business. We're confident about the future of our state. We've got very high rates of vaccination. We continue to see the rate of infection decline on a daily basis. We heard that again today. It's time for us to get out. We're beating this virus. It's time for us to be confident, get our doors open, get travelling again, and get people back into work.
Premier, so you've spoken about the consideration that you might have taken on the Indigenous Affairs portfolio. Why didn't you, and what is your commitment to Indigenous Affairs over the next period?
Well, ultimately, I'm focused on the outcome. And sure, yeah, I certainly considered taking on that portfolio and was pretty keen to do so. But on reflection, I think it's, we've got a strong team here in the New South Wales Cabinet, and my job is to empower our ministers to achieve meaningful change in the areas of their portfolio responsibility. Having said that, I think, particularly in the area of Indigenous affairs and Aboriginal affairs here in our state and around the nation, that we have not achieved in terms of those initiatives in the Closing the Gap targets where we should be. And that's not a New South Wales issue, that's a national issue. And part of the change that we're looking at today is empowering all ministers to have buy-in to that responsibility. And there are many initiatives that go right across the board, right across different departments, or whether that's in Stuart's area, or many, many others across the board. If we all work together and have a key focus, I want all our ministers to be ministers for Aboriginal affairs in their own right. I was out in Canamble on Thursday with Minister Franklin, who has a strong passion in this space too. But ultimately, if we're talking about national unity, we all have to do better. We all have to listen and work with Aboriginal communities, particularly those right across the state. And they're very different issues in different areas. Those in Western Sydney, for example, are very different to those in regional and remote locations across our state. But we can't truly be proud of our country if we're not all working together to achieve true reconciliation. And that's a combination of both symbolic reconciliation and practical reconciliation. And working in harmony together will achieve great things for our people right across our state.
How long do you think till we'll see the Aboriginal flag flying permanently on top of the
Well, as soon as possible. As I said to the department the other day, I mean, we've been working through this for some time, and the first advice I received is that would take 2 years. 2 years. I mean, in the 1920s, it took 9 years to build the Harbour Bridge, but apparently today it takes 2 years to put a flagpole on top of the Harbour Bridge. I mean, I'll climb up there myself and put it up if I need to. I mean, this is, government departments need to work faster, and I can't see why it would take that long. And the new advice that I've received is that time frame can be expedited. I think it went down to 2 years and then to 6 months. So as soon as possible, but surely in a modern world, the concept of putting an additional flagpole on the Harbour Bridge should not take 2 years, given we built the thing in back in the 1920s.
Premier, a few of the things that you talked about, like the flag and the cultural space,
Yep.
are more symbolic recognitions. But what about things like the gap in terms of vaccination rates and also Indigenous deaths in custody?
Yeah,
What are you going
yeah.
to do to
So a few things as well. A lot of this has to do with also having a deeper understanding of the importance of Indigenous culture in our state and in our country. The fact there's not a cultural space, not just for our First Nations people, but for also other young Australians to learn about the importance of the enduring culture of First Nations people in our state and in our nation. And it's a travesty that has not been achieved and established to date here in our state. So I'm completely committed to doing that. I mean, Goat Island is another example where we've spoken a long time about returning that to the Aboriginal land councils. But what's kept that back has been the remediation work. So we're committed today to the remediation of Goat Island, and then we'll work very closely with the local Aboriginal Land Council in terms of how that be best transferred in a way that works very well. But to the question as well in relation to closing the gap, well, these are initiatives. Where I get frustrated in the past has been that, as you say, symbolic gestures get in the way of where the real tough work is required, and that's in the closing the gap targets, and whether that's in early childhood education, where we have seen some success to date, but the reduction of recidivism, deaths in custody, educational and health outcomes. If we continue as a country on the current trajectory, we will not reach those outcomes as we've set by 2030. That is very, very clear to me. And that's why we need to look at new innovative ways of doing things. We've done that in our state. I know as the former Treasurer, initiatives like the Road to Home program, which went out to regional and remote communities in terms of constructing infrastructure and going out to Aboriginal communities and engaging them in terms of working on those projects where there's a benefit for the community and a benefit in terms of employment opportunities. But there is a lot more to do, and having all our ministers working very closely and seeing those objectives as a top priority, I believe will achieve meaningful change and important change. We can never really move forward as a nation if we don't move forward together, and clearly we are not achieving those ends. And having that strong focus and my expectation of the accountability of ministers in achieving those goals will ensure that I don't have to be the Aboriginal Affairs Minister, because all my ministers will be in their own right. In addition to the vaccination rates, we have achieved great results here in our state. We should be very proud of that. Being out in Canam, if you look at the vaccination rates in regional and remote communities, we are doing much better and have achieved better outcomes than other states, and that's because of the establishment of various health services out in those areas that have gone out and working very closely with our Aboriginal communities in those regional and remote locations. We've achieved a great end, and I saw that firsthand in Canamble, and I think we should be very proud of what we've achieved. There's a long way to go, just like we're seeing in metropolitan Sydney with our booster shot campaign, around 47%, I think tick over 47% today, so that's very pleasing to see that rate increased. I do want to make the point to people right across our state, if you haven't made a booster, if you haven't received your booster shot yet, please go and make an appointment. If it's been 3 months since your second dose vaccination, please make that appointment at our 40 centres, or alternatively your pharmacist or your GP. We need to get that rate up. We are seeing some very pleasing and reassuring data that's coming through in relation to hospitalisations, ICU presentations. As we released the data yesterday in relation to our best case scenario, we are travelling incredibly well. We've invested substantially in our health system, not just in Sydney, but right across our state, from Tweed in the north to Bega in the south. Everywhere across New South Wales, we've invested heavily. You can't just turn the tap on when it comes to health investment in this state. It's years and years of investment that sets you up for success. That's exactly what we've done here in our state. $10 billion in capital infrastructure right across the board. 170 hospitals and health facilities have been built in our time in office, and there are 110 that are currently underway. That sets New South Wales apart, and that puts us in an incredibly strong position to deal with the situation that's in front of us. But crucial to all of that, government, just like this partnership today, government can only do so much. We rely today on Rex and the private sector to make investments. When it comes to our vaccination program, we've set up the hubs, but we need people to continue to make that effort as they've done so over the last 6 months in getting vaccinated to now getting boosted. But back to the issue in terms of Aboriginal affairs, I am very confident. Well, I know that if we keep doing the things in the same way that we've been doing them in the past, we won't achieve the outcomes we've set out to achieve. But if we look at new ways of doing things, innovative approaches in doing things, going out to communities and listening, understanding and empowering, we will have the best prospects of bringing our Aboriginal and First Nations people to a position where, as a unified state, as a unified nation, we can be very proud and work through together.
I just have a question, sorry, for Minister Ayres. But in the Jobs Plus program, was there any consideration for kind of Indigenous-owned companies or providing more jobs for people who are Indigenous?
So New South Wales already runs a strong focus on ensuring that both public sector and contracts that we issue create Indigenous employment targets. Jobs Plus is open to all businesses. So if there are Indigenous businesses across New South Wales, indeed across the country, if you're not getting the support that you would like to get in another state, we're open for business to Indigenous Australians and every other Australian. That's what Jobs Plus is all about. I want to see more Indigenous Australians in work. I want to see more Indigenous kids completing school, going on to vocational training qualifications, completing university. If we do those things, more Indigenous Australians will be able to be employed and they'll be more active contributors in their community, and that can only be a great thing for our country.
So the federal government's considering sending Defence Force personnel into aged care homes to help out with the aged care crisis. What do you make of that?
Well, obviously I'd support, I mean, the aged care is in their area of responsibility. We know that the booster shots rate in aged care facilities is not where it should be. Now, it's a very complex area as well. It's not easy, and as I've always said, any support the state can provide to assist the federal government, we will. This is not about the Commonwealth government versus state government. Throughout this entire 2 years, this challenging 2 years, we've always sought to work together to provide support to each other. We know that we have capacity. I mean, my focus as Premier of the state right now is to get that booster rate up here right across the board. Now, aged care can form part of that, and if there's further assistance we can provide, we will. It makes sense. I mean, I haven't seen the details in relation to their plan, but that makes sense based on where those numbers are at. But it's also a very complex and complicated area in respect of vaccinations in aged care. But once again, from our state's perspective, we've got 40 hubs across New South Wales. We have complemented as much as we can the pharmacists and the GP network in having people right across New South Wales have the opportunity to be vaccinated and boosted, but we need people to continue to come forward. As I said, last week we had around 100,000 appointments we could have had in our centres that went begging. So my continued ask is that people come forward. The other point is, as I've said, and I know there's been some confusion because different states have different positions in the ATAGI advice, but the advice we have in New South Wales, if it has been 4 to 6 weeks since you've had COVID, you can receive that booster shot. So please go out and do it. And to the question, if there's any support that we can provide the federal government in relation to aged care, we will. If we have capacity to do it, we will support it. But ultimately, I've also got to ensure, from my perspective, that where we do have that level of responsibility here in New South Wales, that we achieve a greater rate of boosters in our hubs. And we have that set up. We have the supply. We have the appointments. We have the staff. Our staff have been doing an amazing job over 2 years, and we just ask people to continue to come forward because the evidence is very clear, not just here but around the world, across our country. Boosters have had a substantial impact in the reduction of hospitalisations and ICU presentations and death. in our state.
Just as far as the case numbers go, getting lower by the day, are you convinced that those numbers are a true reflection of, you know, the testing? Obviously, a lot of people doing RAPs nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, we would expect those numbers in COVID in the community to be higher than the, I think it's 8,000 cases we released today. But we've always said, and I know the media has a much greater focus on the case numbers. Our focus here has been hospitalisations and ICU presentations. But what is pleasing to see here in our state is there's a plateauing of those numbers. There's a reduction in hospitalisations, and there's a reduction in our ICU capacity. We provided that information to the public, and I think there's a lot here in New South Wales right now to be optimistic about. And if we go back to all the calls and the opposition's calls to go into lockdown, have been proven to be wrong. Our approach with a highly vaccinated population is to keep society open, to keep businesses moving, to keep people in jobs. Last year, during lockdowns, we lost close to 300,000 jobs in this state. That is people who cannot provide for their families, and they were very difficult decisions for this government to make. Our commitment and our pact with the people of New South Wales was, once we had that vaccination rate high, to keep our state open, to keep businesses in business and keep people in work. That has been our focus over the course of this period of time. Despite all the noise, that is where we're heading as a state. And we know, as you've spoken today, both John and Stuart, confidence is key. We also know as case numbers increase and there's outbreaks from time to time, confidence will fall. But the best thing that we can do in keeping people safe is getting vaccinated. And I already can see confidence returning right across our state. And being out in far west New South Wales during the week, being out in regional communities, being out in the suburbs here in Sydney, you can see as we've got school going back, and let me tell you about school going back, that was key. And despite the noise, despite the Doctors' Union, Medical Association coming out and saying kids shouldn't go back to classroom, well, I think parents and kids spoke with their feet this week. Kids need to be back in the classroom for their educational outcomes, their social outcomes, and for mental health, and also for parents, so parents can get back to work. Stuart spoke very well early this morning about getting back to normal. Well, that's what this is all about. That's exactly what our focus has been here in our state. Keep our health system strong. We've invested heavily in that. Keep businesses open and keep people in work. And there's a lot of talk about a whole range of issues today, text messages here, text messages there. I'll tell you what mums and dads right across our state care about today, and that's about the cost of living, staying in work, getting kids back to school and returning to normal. That's our focus. There'll be noise from time to time. We are completely focused on ensuring we get back to normal as quickly as possible. Our people should have confidence based on our high vaccination rates, based on the hospitalisations and ICU presentations here in New South Wales. Whether you're in metropolitan Sydney, Western Sydney, regional New South Wales, we have an incredibly strong health system in this state. One of the best, certainly the best in the country, but one of the best in the world. That should give confidence as we move through this period of time, as we open up, as we get back to the life that we love. That's exactly what's been our approach in this state. Lockdowns are not the solution. We've already seen that in other countries around the world in dealing with Omicron. Going into lockdown hasn't changed a thing. Case numbers have escalated at the same rates pretty much globally. So what are the facts? The facts are we have a highly transmissible variant that is less severe, and that vaccinations and boosters are key to keeping you safe. So our approach is the right approach. It's the hard road, but the right road, and that will ensure greater opportunity and prosperity for our people for generations to come. And the suggestion that we should close schools on medical grounds was completely wrong. We cannot mortgage off our children's future. We have to face into the challenge that we have, and not just New South Wales has, that Australia has and the world has. We have to live in the world the way it is, not as we want it to be. What is in our control is our vaccination rates and our booster rates. I want to thank everybody for what they've done in relation to doing that. And now we can move forward as a state and as a nation. The approach of opening up is the right approach, despite what the approach that the opposition have pushed in terms of closing down is the easy road. It's a road that leads to high unemployment, people losing their jobs, businesses having to close. Our approach is the right approach, and that is drive vaccinations, drive boosters, invest in your health system, and keep society open. That will create challenges on the way through, as we have seen, as we transition through this. Furloughed workforces. There have been difficulties along the way. We're seeing difficulties with schools today. Over the course of this week, we've had many children who have had to stay at home. We've had many teachers who've had to stay at home. But we haven't closed one school. Last year during Delta, we closed many schools. But now we have a highly vaccinated population. The approach we're taking is the right approach. There'll be bumps along the way. The alternative is to close down schools. The alternative is to close down society. The alternative is to close down businesses. That is the wrong approach. This is the right approach. As I've said, it's the hard road, but it's the right road. And I want to thank everybody across our state for the efforts and the sacrifices that they continue to make in keeping them safe, but at the same time ensuring we get kids back in the classroom, because that's one of the most important things we've achieved this week, and one of the most important things as we head through 2022.
So, Dr. McAnulty. As far as this Omicron variant being goes, is there any indication that that's in New South Wales at all?
Could you repeat that question?
The variant, that Omicron subvariant.
Oh, the BA2. Yeah. Well, around the world, and including around Australia and in New South Wales, there's been a number of the BA2 variant. It's starting to increase as we expect. The Omicron we know is very transmissible, but there's no indication that it has any different at this stage, any different characteristics to the usual Omicron variant.
And as far as the case numbers go, a similar question to ask the Premier. Those numbers are starting to trend down. Are you confident that's, even if they're not accurate specifically, that it's a reflection of where we're at?
Yeah, look, for most diseases we look at notifiable numbers that come in, and that's what we're doing with COVID now. And it gives not one indicator is perfect. We know that there are other cases out there beyond what we see in the numbers, but looking at a range of indicators, including, as the Premier said, hospitalisations, admissions to ICUs, as well as the numbers of people who are testing positive for RATs on rapid antigen tests and on PCR, that gives us confidence that the trend is down, which is really pleasing. Although people are working hard in the health system, of course, to look after patients, all indications that we're over the other side. But it's important that everyone maintains those COVID-safe behaviours and, importantly, get boosted. We know boostering is just so important to maintaining that level of immunity in the community. It protects you from severe disease, but also helps protect transmission within the community.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone.